This is the video for 3-6 compound inequalities. A compound inequality consists of two distinct inequalities joined by the word and or by the word or. And interval notation describes an interval on the number line using parentheses and or brackets. So the other day we learned about set builder notation, and today we are going to be learning about interval notation. So let's look at example number 1, writing a compound inequality. All real numbers that are greater than -2 and less than 6. I always suggest you start by putting your situation on a number line. All real numbers that are greater than -2 and less than 6. So what do we have here? We have an and statement. And how do we write that? We write it like this. All real numbers that are greater than -2 and less than 6. On the next example, all real numbers that are less than 0 or greater than or equal to 5. So what do we have here? We have an or statement. All real numbers that are less than 0 or greater than or equal to 5. And how do we write that? X is going to be less than 0 or X is going to be greater than or equal to 5. And on your handouts, I summarized what we're doing here. Here is a difference between an and statement and an or statement and what it looks like on a number line. And this is how an and statement is always written. This is your handout. So go ahead and hit pause and work out these two on your own problems. And here are your answers. The first one is an and statement. The next one is an or statement. That second one can be a little tricky. All real numbers that are less than or equal to 2, that's your first one. Or greater than 6, that's your next one. And again, always write it out on the number line first and then write out your inequality. It's a little easier then. Okay, so let's look at example number 2, solving a compound inequality involving and. This is how I want you to do these because these can get very complicated. I want you to break it up. So what I mean by that is I want you to go ahead and solve this side first. -3 is less than or equal to m minus 4. Solve that side first and then solve this side. M minus 4 is less than -1. So solve it one side at a time because it can get pretty tricky as the math gets a little bit more complicated. So we're going to solve that side and then we're going to solve this side. So this side ends up being 1 is less than or equal to m, and just leave it like that for a second and watch what happens. And this side ends up being m is less than 3. Okay, well we know this is an and statement because and statements are always written like that, and compound inequalities. So let's first draw it on the number line and make sure that we did our signs correctly and that this looks like an and statement. We have 1 and 3. And what are we saying? m is greater than or equal to 1 and less than 3. Okay, so it'll look like that on the number line. So that is an and statement. But now what we need to do is we need to bring these down and we need to rewrite it. So what are we saying? M is greater than or equal to 1 and less than 3. And so this is going to be your final answer. And so this is the most organized way to do this. This is your final answer here. The most organized way to do this, as the math gets more complicated, is to literally break up the compound inequality, solve each side individually, and then stick it back together. Okay, so following those steps, now what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and I want you to solve this on your own. Okay, here's the answer. Y is greater than 2/3 and y is less than 6. I broke it up and solved one side, and then I solved the other side, and then I put the compound inequality back together and I graphed it. And one of the reasons why I graph it is because I know it needs to be an and statement, so I need to make sure that my arrows are pointing the right way. Especially when you get into flipping signs, you need to make sure that you've done it correctly, so go ahead and graph it and make sure that it matches what an and statement is supposed to look like. Okay, so now let's do or statements. These are pretty simple. X is either this or it's this. So all you're doing is solving one and then solving the other. So let's see, what am I doing here? I'm subtracting 2 from both sides, and that becomes 3x is less than -9, so x is less than -3. Or I'm subtracting 5 from both sides. I'm going to divide both sides by -4, so I need to flip my sign. That becomes 1. So x is greater than 1. So I'm just solving one side and then solving the other. And so what's my answer? X is less than -3 or x is greater than 1. And that's my answer. And just to make sure I didn't mess up on my signs, let's graph it. I know what an or statement is supposed to look like. So x is going to be less than -3. Or x is going to be greater than 1. There you go. So I know my signs at least are correct. Okay, so go ahead and hit pause and work out this on your own, this or statement. And here's your answer. If you got it wrong, please pause the video, make sure you understand what you did wrong, and rework it out. And this is appropriate form. You always want to put what y is less than on the left side or y is greater than on the right side. And this is appropriate form. This is what I got, and then I just switched the order to make it appropriate form, and then I graphed it. Okay, so let's go to the last example. So once again, look at your handout where I summarized everything that we're doing today. In interval notation, parentheses are used when it's less than or greater than. Brackets are used when it's less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. Negative infinity is used when x is less than a number, and positive infinity is used when x is greater than a number. So what do I mean by all this? This is not as hard as you think, and actually it's very useful. This is a very concise way of communicating what would usually take a lot of room. Okay, so what is this saying? First of all, this is an and statement. There's no infinity symbol, and so it is an and statement. Pause the video and take notes as I talk. rewind the video and listen to it again if you missed something. If there is an infinity symbol, you know it's going to be an or statement. But if there's no infinity symbol and you just have something that looks like that, it's going to be an and statement. Well, I know it's going to be an and statement, so let me draw my number line. Always draw your number line first. Always. It'll make it so much easier, I promise. And so what is this saying? Well, I'm dealing with the numbers -4 and 6. So I know it's an and statement, and I know it's going to be, this is the set of all numbers between -4 and 6. However, this -4 has a bracket. If it has a bracket, that means it was an or equal to. It's including -4. But if it's a parentheses, it does not include it. So what is this saying? This is saying x is going to be greater than or equal to -4 and less than 6. And so you can see how this is a very concise way of saying all of this. So I can look at this and I can say the bracket means it's including, so x is going to be greater than or equal to -4, but less than 6, not including 6. And so that's what interval notation means. And that's how that works. You can rewind that video and watch that again if you need to. But now let's look at this. This is going to be an or statement, so I know I'm going to be dealing with to infinity. Always graph it. It makes it so much easier if you graph it first. So I've got -1 and 2. And so let me graph what it's saying. It's saying x is less than or equal to -1, or x is greater than 2. Well, now let me write that in interval notation. I'm going out here towards -infinity, and where am I starting? I'm starting at -1 inclusive. I'm going towards -infinity, which is always going to have a parentheses because you're never actually going to include -infinity. I'm starting at -1 inclusive, and I'm going all the way out to -infinity. Over here, I'm starting at 2, but not including 2, so that's a parentheses. And what am I doing? I'm going all the way out to +infinity. And that is how you write interval notation. Go ahead and rewind that and watch that again. And then when you're ready, try on your own. And this is actually a single inequality. It's not a compound, but go ahead and write that single inequality in interval notation. Okay. So let's start up here. I know this is going to be an and statement, and so I know I'm going to be talking about the numbers in between -2 and 7. From -2 to +7, it's an and statement. But it doesn't include -2 because that's a parentheses, but it does include 7 because that's a bracket. So that's going to be a closed circle. A bracket is a closed circle. It means including that number. And so what is this saying? X is going to be greater than -2 and less than or equal to 7. That's what this is saying. X is going to be greater than -2, but not including -2, and less than 7, including 7. And this one is pretty simple. I'm starting at 7. Y is going to be greater than 7. So I'm starting at 7, but not including 7. So it's a parentheses, and I'm going all the way to +infinity. So go ahead and do your homework and email me if you have any questions.